Get out of here. First class is not for people like you. The words hit the cabin like a slap. Passengers froze. Forks suspended above half-eaten plates. Conversations cut short mid-sentence. A flight attendant leaned in close, her voice sharp and slicing, echoing through the hush of the aisle. Beside her, a security officer shifted his weight, already preparing to drag a woman from a seat she had paid for. That woman did not flinch. Her hands rested on the armrests, her brown leather bag steady on her lap, her eyes locked forward. She had heard those words before, years ago, in different rooms, from different mouths. But here, at 37,000 feet, those same words carried a violence that pressed against every wall of the cabin. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we are glad you are here. Now, back to her. The attendant's finger jabbed toward the back of the plane. You need to move now. Economy is waiting. Do not make me call security twice. Her voice was firm, but there was something else beneath it. The satisfaction of power misused. A murmur rippled through the cabin. A man in seat 3C whispered to his wife, "She is not doing anything wrong." Another passenger lifted his phone, the red recording light a quiet act of defiance. The security officer stepped forward, his hand grazing the metal clip of his badge. "Ma'am, stand up. This will get difficult if you do not comply." His tone carried the weight of someone who had already decided she did not belong. The woman's jaw tightened, but she did not rise. Her silence was not surrender. It was steel. A flash of memory cut through her mind. At 20 years old, she had been told to leave a hotel lobby, the same words echoing, "This space is not for you." At 25, she had been denied a seat at a boardroom table. And now, decades later, she heard it again, not whispered but shouted in front of strangers, amplified by authority. From row 4, a young woman's voice trembled. "This does not feel right." She clutched her purse, her eyes darting between the attendant and the seated passenger. The silence that followed was heavy, charged, and everyone in that cabin knew they were watching a line being crossed. The attendant leaned closer, her palm hovering inches from the woman's face. "Do you hear me? Get out." The air grew thick. The woman in the seat exhaled once, slow, deliberate. Her stillness was louder than the shouting above her. The cabin was no longer a place of travel. It was a courtroom, a test, a reckoning yet to come. She sat still, the brown leather bag unmoved on her lap, while the cabin around her shifted into unease. The silence was broken when a second flight attendant stepped forward. Her tone was not sharp, but drenched in contempt, as if every syllable was a dismissal. "You must be lost. Economy is behind you. People like you cannot just walk into first class as if it is your living room." The words rolled across the rows like turbulence, shaking the calm more than any storm outside the window could. A man in seat 2D coughed nervously, his hand retreating from the call button. Another passenger leaned closer to whisper, "She has a ticket. I saw it when she sat down." But the whisper was swallowed by the louder voice of authority. The seated woman did not respond. She looked straight ahead, her breathing even, her gaze steady. That calm was the most dangerous thing in the room, because it unsettled those who expected begging or rage. The stillness declared something else. Control. The first attendant folded her arms, emboldened by silence. "We do not need drama, just leave quietly before this gets messy." She gestured toward the security officer, who now stood taller, hand resting near his belt. His presence was a warning. Resistance will be punished. From row 3, a young man in a blue jacket raised his phone. The red light blinked to life, tiny but bright, like a signal flare in the dim cabin. Another passenger, an older woman with silver hair, whispered loud enough to carry, "This is not right. She is sitting where she belongs." The attendants ignored the voices. The second attendant smirked, lowering her tone so only the nearby seats could hear, but loud enough that the humiliation carried. "Do not waste our time. Fraudsters come dressed like this all the time. They sneak in hoping no one checks." The insult was aimed at her skin, her presence, her existence in that seat. The woman in the chair did not blink, but memory moved behind her eyes. At 21 years old, she had walked into a bank branch with a check from her first business deal. The teller had refused to process it, saying, "We cannot risk fraud." At 28, she had been denied entry to a conference, told bluntly, This space is reserved for real executives. Each insult had been swallowed, endured, transformed into fuel. Now, on this aircraft, the words returned like echoes, but this time she would not be moved. A man in seat 4 shifted forward. His voice cut through the growing tension. "Excuse me, but she showed her ticket. I watched her scan it." The cabin turned toward him. For a moment, his words pierced the arrogance in the air. But the first attendant shot back quickly. "Sir, stay out of this. We know what we are doing." Ugh. The security officer leaned closer, voice flat and rehearsed. "Ma'am, if you do not stand up now, we will remove you by force. This is your final warning." She finally moved, not to rise, not to retreat. Her hand slid calmly to her phone. Her thumb tapped the screen once. A call connected instantly. A voice on the other end, crisp and composed, said, "Protocol ready." She spoke for the first time since the storm began. Her tone was low, deliberate, and unwavering. "Begin the log. Everything from this moment forward is recorded." The cabin stilled again. The passengers who had been whispering now leaned forward, sensing that the script was shifting. The attendants exchanged a glance. The security officer hesitated, as if unsure whether he was still in control. And the woman remained seated, her silence now weaponized, her power invisible but waiting to be revealed. The tension inside the cabin thickened like smoke that refused to clear. The woman had spoken only a few words, but the weight of them changed the air. Her phone rested lightly in her hand, the line still open, the unseen presence of someone listening far beyond the fuselage. The first flight attendant stepped back, unsettled, but the second pressed forward, eager to prove authority. She leaned down until her shadow fell across the seated passenger. "Do you hear yourself? Recording calls, pretending like you matter here? You are in the wrong place and you are about to be escorted out." Her lips curled as she said it, each word dipped in scorn. The woman did not answer. She let the silence stretch, her eyes locked on the aisle ahead. That stillness carried more force than any protest. The passengers around her shifted in their seats, torn between disbelief and outrage. From the rear of the first-class section, a young woman in her 20s rose halfway. Her voice trembled, but it carried. "Why are you treating her like this?" She showed her boarding pass. I saw the scanner turn green. Her words cracked the atmosphere. Heads turned. A man 2 rows away nodded in agreement. The second attendant shot back with venom. "Sit down. This has nothing to do with you." But the crack had widened. A whisper rippled through the cabin. "She has a real ticket." Why are they saying otherwise? A father traveling with his teenage daughter leaned forward, shaking his head. "This is wrong. It feels like something else is happening here." The security officer cleared his throat, forcing his voice into authority. "Passengers, remain seated. This is a standard fraud check." But the word fraud rang too loud, heavy with implication. The silver-haired woman in seat 3B muttered, "Fraud?" She is sitting there quietly. What fraud? The woman in the chair tightened her grip on her phone. Her memory surged again. At 19 years old, she had been stopped at an airport, pulled aside while others walked through. They told her the system flagged her. She stood barefoot on a cold floor while strangers searched her bags. The shame burned, but it also built resolve. And now, decades later, the same suspicion stared back at her in different uniforms. The second attendant slammed a hand on the tray table. "Security, take her out. She does not belong here." The officer moved closer, his hand brushing her shoulder. A sharp intake of breath swept the rows. Cameras lifted higher, small red dots multiplying like sparks in the dark. The woman finally lifted her eyes, her voice cut like glass. "Touch me again, and this company will answer for it in ways you cannot imagine." The officer froze, not because he believed her yet, but because the tone left no room for doubt. The cabin fell utterly silent. Every passenger was waiting for the next word, the next move. The first attendant broke that silence with mockery. "You really think you can threaten an airline? People like you always think you are above the rules." The phrase, "people like you," dropped like lead, unmistakable, heavy with centuries of weight. Gasps spread across the cabin. A teenager in row 6 whispered to his mother, "Did she just say that?" The mother squeezed his hand, her eyes narrowed with fury. The woman in the seat inhaled once, slow and steady. She did not shout, but her words landed with precision. "You called me a fraud. You told me I do not belong. And yet, I am still here." Her phone vibrated softly. The voice on the line returned, calm and efficient. Logging complete. Boardroom review has started. Do you want escalation to phase 2? She glanced up at the faces watching her, at the phone's recording, at the truth already spreading beyond the walls of the aircraft. Her reply was quiet, certain, and final. Proceed. The balance of power in the cabin shifted. Everyone felt it. The attendants who once commanded the aisle now stood exposed, and the woman who had been told to leave sat firmer than ever, the storm moving toward them instead of her. The cabin was no longer calm. It vibrated with unease, with whispers darting from seat to seat, with the tension of passengers deciding whether to stay silent or to speak. The woman remained steady in her chair, her phone still connected, her brown leather bag resting untouched at her side. She was not moving, not bending, not surrendering. The first attendant's face flushed red. She was no longer in control, and the loss made her voice sharper, louder. This is your last chance. Get out of this seat. I do not care what card you waved or what name you claimed. First class is for real clients, not for imposters. Her words carried like a public announcement. The passengers who had been hesitant now bristled. A man in row 2 shook his head slowly. A woman beside him whispered, "She is humiliating her for no reason." The security officer stepped forward again, jaw tight, one hand gripping the top of the seat in front of him. He leaned in close, his tone hard. "Stand up or I will drag you out myself." The air thickened. Passengers leaned forward, phones raised higher, the weight of dozens of eyes on the scene. Still, the woman did not move. She blinked once, her breathing steady, her silence deliberate. That silence was not weakness. It was fire-contained, waiting. From row 4, the young woman who had spoken earlier stood taller this time. Her voice quivered, but it was louder. "She is not the problem. You are. You are humiliating someone who has done nothing wrong." Her words traveled down the aisle. A few passengers nodded. A man whispered, "Exactly. They are crossing the line." The second attendant laughed, short and cruel. "Do not be fooled. Women like her try this all the time. Fake tickets, fake names, fake stories. It is a game, and we are trained to stop it." That sentence pierced the cabin like a blade. Women like her. It was no longer about a boarding pass. It was about identity, about race, about belonging. The silver-haired woman in seat 3B spoke again, her voice shaking with anger. "I cannot believe I just heard that. You are profiling her because she is black." Gasps followed. The truth had been spoken aloud. The security officer reached for the woman's arm, his fingers brushing her sleeve. The moment crackled, phones tilted, capturing every second. The passengers leaned in, breaths held. The woman's voice finally rose, not a shout but a command that filled the cabin. "If you put your hands on me again, you will answer not to a passenger but to a board of directors." The officer froze, confusion flickering in his eyes. The attendants exchanged nervous glances. For the first time, doubt entered their posture. Her phone chimed once more. The voice on the line was calm, steady, professional. Phase 2 initiated. Internal audit is active. Every word spoken in this cabin is now logged in real time. The woman tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing. "Good. Keep it running." The passengers erupted in whispers. Someone said, "She is not bluffing." Another muttered, "This is bigger than we think." The first attendant snapped back, louder now, desperate to reclaim control. "Do not listen to her. She is a fraud. She is nothing. Remove her now before she makes a bigger scene." But the bigger scene had already begun. The cabin had turned. The audience was no longer passive. The murmurs were growing into voices. And the woman, still calm, still seated, allowed the storm to break around her, knowing that her silence was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. The storm inside the cabin did not pass. It swelled. Passengers were no longer just whispering. They were leaning into the aisle, glancing at one another, weighing whether to speak louder, whether to take a stand. The weight of injustice pressed against every row, making the space feel tighter than the steel walls allowed. The young woman from row 4 did not sit down. Her hands clutched her purse, but her voice grew firmer. "You cannot do this. She is not doing anything wrong. You are humiliating her because of how she looks." Her words carried farther this time, carried into the ears of passengers who had tried to stay quiet. A man in row 6 muttered, "She is right." A woman across the aisle whispered, "This feels like discrimination." The whispers were gathering force, rolling forward like a tide. The first flight attendant's face tightened, her tone hard as iron. Enough. Sit down, all of you. This woman is not a legitimate client. She is disrupting this flight. Security, remove her immediately. The officer stepped forward again, his hand tightening into a fist at his side. He was no longer calm. He was bracing for confrontation. His voice was sharp, meant to silence the cabin. Everyone remain seated. This is a standard protocol. Do not interfere. But the phrase, standard protocol, fell flat. Passengers had seen enough. A silver-haired woman raised her phone higher. Her voice broke through the officer's command. Standard protocol is not calling someone a fraud without proof. Standard protocol is not saying people like you. This is wrong. Gasps followed, then murmurs of agreement. A teenager in row 7 shouted, "I am recording this. Everyone will see what you are doing." The woman in the seat still had not moved. Her stillness was its own declaration. She let the chaos unfold around her, her silence anchoring the storm. Her eyes, steady and unflinching, never left the aisle. Her phone vibrated again. The voice of her assistant came through crisp and controlled. Audit confirmation complete. Every word from the attendants and the officer has been timed, stamped, and transmitted. The board is watching. The woman's lips curved into the faintest line of resolve. She spoke softly, but her words traveled. Let them hear it all. The second attendant snapped, desperate to claw back authority. Do not believe her. She is nothing. She is pretending. She will be in handcuffs before we land. Those words landed heavy, cruel, and deliberate. But instead of silencing the passengers, they broke something open. A man in row 3, tall and broad-shouldered, stood slowly. His voice was deep, steady. I saw her ticket. It scanned green. You tore it up in front of us. That is not protocol. That is harassment. The tension split wide. More passengers began to murmur, louder now. One woman said, "I will not fly this airline again." Another said, "This is being posted right now." The cabin buzzed like a hive, alive with outrage. The officer barked, "Everyone sit down or I will clear the cabin." But no one moved back. The silence that followed was not obedience. It was defiance. The woman in the seat remained at the center, her phone open, her posture unbroken. She did not need to shout. She had already shifted the room. The attendants were no longer in control. The officer was no longer unquestioned. And the passengers, once quiet, were beginning to stand. The reckoning had started, and she had not yet revealed who she truly was. The pressure inside the cabin reached its peak. What had begun as a quiet boarding now looked like a trial staged in the sky. Every row of first class felt charged, like the crackle before lightning. The woman remained seated, her brown leather bag untouched, her phone glowing faintly in her hand. The cabin manager arrived, striding down the aisle with forced authority. His uniform was pressed, his voice trained, but his expression betrayed irritation. He stopped at the woman's row, looked her over with a sneer, and said loudly enough for all to hear, "We do not tolerate fraud on this airline. You are not a verified passenger. Leave the seat or face removal." The words were knives. They cut through the space and landed heavy in the ears of every passenger. A father, traveling with his teenage son, whispered, "Fraud?" She showed her ticket. "This is outrageous." The boy gripped his phone tighter, recording every second. The woman lifted her eyes to the manager. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her stillness carried a gravity that made him falter for a fraction of a second before pressing on. "Security, you are authorized. Get her out." The officer moved closer, but the cabin was no longer silent. The silver-haired woman from row 3 called out, "She has not raised her voice once. Not once. And yet you call her a fraud? What exactly are you afraid of?" Murmurs surged into the air. Another passenger added, "This is discrimination. Call it what it island." The manager's face tightened. His tone grew colder. "These claims are nonsense. This is about procedure. She is a disturbance, nothing more." But his words did not land. The tide had shifted. The passengers were no longer passive. They were watching him, judging him, recording him. The woman finally spoke, her voice low but steady. "You are destroying this airline with every word you choose." Her phone vibrated again. The assistant's voice came through clearly, cutting into the silence. "Phase 3 is ready. Documentation of biased language has been logged. We also confirmed prior complaints involving this manager, all dismissed without investigation." Gasps broke out across the rows. The man in row 3 shook his head. "So this is not the first time." A young woman said firmly, "You cannot hide this anymore." The manager's composure cracked. His voice rose, desperate. "She is lying. Do not listen to her. She is manipulating all of you." But even as he shouted, his authority drained away. The passengers were leaning forward, not back. They were siding with her, not him. The officer's hand hovered near her arm again. The tension in the cabin was unbearable, every eye fixed on the moment. The woman did not flinch. She turned her head slowly, her voice sharp enough to slice the air. "If you touch me, you will regret it more than you can imagine." The manager barked back, but the power had already shifted. The woman did not rise, did not fight. She let the silence hang like a verdict. And in that silence, the cabin no longer belonged to the crew. It belonged to her. The trial they had staged had turned against them. The storm they thought they controlled was already slipping through their hands. The breaking point arrived not with another insult, but with an act. The cabin manager's hand shot forward, snatching the boarding pass stub that had been resting on the tray table. He tore it clean down the middle, the rip loud and violent, echoing through the tense silence of first class. Gasps erupted across the cabin. A woman in row 5 clutched her chest. A teenager muttered, "He really just did that." Phones lifted higher, capturing every angle. The evidence was no longer hidden in words. It was now physical, undeniable, and filmed by dozens of witnesses. The manager held the torn pieces in his fist as if they were proof of guilt. His voice rose, desperate to regain control. "This is counterfeit. She is a fraud. She is attempting to deceive this airline, and I will not allow it." But the passengers were not convinced. The silver-haired woman shouted back, "I saw that pass scan green with my own eyes. You destroyed it because you did not want the truth." A man 2 rows behind her added, "That is not procedure. That is sabotage." The officer stepped closer to the seated woman. His voice hardened, trying to drown out the voices around him. "You are being detained for non-compliance. Stand up now." His hand reached toward her brown leather bag, fingers brushing the strap as if to seize it. The woman's eyes lifted, calm but unbreakable. Her words cut sharper than the sound of paper tearing. "That bag is mine. Touch it again, and you will answer to more than this cabin. You will answer in court." The officer froze, but the cabin manager pushed forward, pointing his finger like a gavel. "You do not belong here. You never did." The phrase landed heavy. It was not about a ticket anymore. It was about identity. The passengers heard it. They felt the poison in it. A teenager whispered to his mother, "That was racist." She nodded, her lips pressed tight with fury. The woman remained seated, her silence deliberate, her power gathering. Her phone vibrated again. The assistant's voice carried into the charged air. "Escalation confirmed. Legal review is active. Every biased phrase and every action is documented in real time. The board is monitoring." A ripple ran through the rows. A businessman whispered, "She is connected. This is bigger than we thought." Another passenger murmured, "They are finished." The manager slammed his fist against the headrest in frustration. "Do not believe her. She is bluffing. She is nothing. Remove her now." His voice cracked, desperation replacing authority. The woman lifted her gaze fully, her tone low but resonant. "You called me a fraud. You tore my pass. You said I do not belong. And yet, here I am, still seated, still standing in truth." Her words silenced the cabin. Even the officer hesitated, his hand pulling back from the strap of her bag. The attendants shifted nervously, their confidence drained. The passengers were no longer watching a removal. They were watching a reckoning. And though the manager tried to fill the air with threats, the power in the cabin had already moved. It now rested in the calm, unshaken presence of the woman they had tried to erase. The aisle felt smaller now, crowded not with bodies but with tension. Every passenger leaned forward, eyes fixed on the clash unfolding only a few feet away. The torn boarding pass lay in shreds on the carpet, a symbol of humiliation and arrogance. The manager's voice still echoed, but the weight of his words was fading. He no longer sounded authoritative. He sounded desperate. The woman sat unshaken, her phone still glowing faintly. She lifted it closer to her mouth, her tone even, precise. "Initiate escalation protocol. Confirm verification." On the other end, the assistant's reply came swift and calm. "Verification initiated. Identity, ownership, and authority will be cross-checked against the system. Board review panel is now live." The passengers who had been recording murmured among themselves. A man whispered, "Board review? She works with them. Another said, "This is real. Look at how calm she island." The security officer, still looming, tried to reassert control. His voice was flat but brittle. "Stop with your games. You are not fooling anyone. This is your final warning. Stand up." But the tide in the cabin had turned. The passengers were no longer passive witnesses. A young man in row 6 spoke loudly enough for all to hear. "She does not have to stand. She is being harassed." Others nodded. A woman added, "This is discrimination, plain and simple." The woman in the seat finally shifted her posture, not to rise, but to lean forward just slightly, her eyes sharp, her voice measured. "You wanted a scene. Here at Island, every second is logged, every insult recorded. The truth is not leaving this cabin." Gasps moved through the rows. The manager flinched but forced a laugh, brittle and hollow. "You think anyone will believe you?" Her phone vibrated again. The assistant's voice rang clear. "Confirmation complete. Ownership credentials linked. Protocol is active. The airline's executive board has access to the feed." The manager's face drained of color. The officer stepped back half a pace. The attendants exchanged nervous glances. The silence that followed was not calm. It was the heavy silence of people realizing the ground beneath them was shifting. And still, the woman did not raise her voice. She did not stand. She let the silence weigh, let the cabin itself judge. Her strength was not in volume but in certainty. The reckoning had begun, and the people who thought they controlled the aisle were now the ones standing trial. The silence inside the cabin had transformed. It was no longer passive, no longer uncertain. It was charged with expectation, with the weight of something about to break wide open. The manager stood frozen, the torn boarding pass still clenched in his fist, while the passengers stared not at him, but at the calm woman in seat 2A. She lifted her phone, her voice firm but even. "Confirm executive clearance." The reply came instantly, crisp and undeniable. "Clearance verified. Identity confirmed. You hold owner-level authority." Ugh. The words rippled through the cabin like thunder. Passengers who had been whispering now gasped aloud. A teenager in row 7 said, "Owner level? Did they just say owner?" His mother pressed a hand over her mouth, eyes widening. The manager tried to laugh, but his voice cracked. "Lies. That is not possible. She is not—" He stopped, choking on the words as he noticed the shift around him. The officer, who had stood ready to drag her out, now hesitated fully, his posture broken, his certainty gone. The woman finally raised her head, her gaze sweeping the aisle, landing squarely on the manager. Her tone was low, steady, and devastating. "You told me I do not belong. You called me a fraud. But the truth is simple. I own this airline. This jet is mine." The cabin erupted. Gasps, murmurs, and even applause rolled through the rows. Phones shot higher, capturing the moment from every angle. The silver-haired woman in row 3 said loudly, "I knew it. She was too calm. She is in charge." The manager's face turned pale, his authority crumbling in front of dozens of witnesses. He stammered, "That cannot be true. She is lying. She has to be lying." But his denial sounded weaker with every syllable. The woman did not blink. She leaned forward slightly, her words cutting through his collapse. "You wanted to erase me in front of strangers. Now those same strangers will watch you answer for it." The officer stepped back entirely, his arms falling to his sides. The attendants, who had stood tall before, now looked to one another for guidance, their confidence gone. The passengers, once silent, began to clap. It started with one, then another, until the sound filled the cabin. The applause was not for drama, it was for justice revealed in real time. The manager still stood in the aisle, clutching the torn paper like it could save him. But everyone could see the truth. The power had shifted, and it would not return to him. The woman set her phone down gently on the tray table. Her brown leather bag remained at her side, untouched, steady, her eyes fixed on the faces before her. "You thought you could throw me out of my own seat, but you cannot throw me out of what I built." The moment landed heavy, undeniable. The cabin was no longer his. It was hers, and everyone knew it. The revelation struck the cabin like a bolt of lightning. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The truth hung in the air, undeniable and irreversible. The passengers who had been hesitant were now emboldened. Their eyes no longer darted nervously between crew and passenger. They were fixed on her, The woman, they now understood, was not only legitimate but the most powerful presence in the room. The manager's hand shook around the shredded boarding pass. His voice faltered as he tried to recover. You cannot prove that. You are just making noise. None of this means anything." But his words sounded hollow, weak, stripped of their former bite. The officer looked at him with hesitation, clearly questioning whether to obey any more commands. The attendants shuffled back a step, their confidence leaking out of them like air from a punctured tire. The silver-haired woman in row 3 stood tall, phone in hand, her voice steady and loud. "We all heard it. The system confirmed her. She owns this. She belongs here more than any of you." Her statement drew murmurs of agreement, heads nodding across the rows. The manager's face drained of color. His authority collapsed under the weight of witnesses and evidence. He stammered, She tricked the system. Yes, that must be it." A businessman in row 5 scoffed, shaking his head. "No one tricks an airline system in front of a full cabin. Stop insulting our intelligence." The applause that followed was brief but sharp, passengers taking sides without hesitation. The woman finally shifted, sitting straighter in her seat. Her voice filled the space, calm but commanding. "You asked who I am. You demanded I leave. Now you know the truth. I am the founder. I am the owner. Every word you spoke has been recorded, and you will answer for all of it." Gasps and exclamations rippled again, louder than before. The young woman in row 4 smiled through tears of relief. "I knew something about her was different. She was too calm. She was never afraid." The manager stumbled back a step, his knees nearly buckling. He glanced at the officer for support, but the officer no longer moved. He had retreated into the aisle, unwilling to touch the woman, unwilling to carry out a command that had already been exposed as unjust. The woman's assistant's voice came through the phone once more. "Confirmation logged. Authority recognized at the highest level. Do you want me to initiate termination procedures now?" The passengers leaned in, holding their breath. They could sense what was coming. The woman's gaze swept the cabin, calm and unhurried. She answered with the weight of someone who had already decided. "Yes, it is time." The cabin was no longer a battleground. It was a courtroom, and the verdict had just been spoken. The crew who once believed they held power were now the ones trembling, their future dissolving in front of a plane full of witnesses. The command was given, and the fallout was immediate. Her assistant's voice carried through the phone, steady and final. Authorization confirmed. Access revoked. Effective immediately. At that exact moment, the manager's badge emitted a sharp tone, and its light turned red. His access was gone. The officer's device flickered with the same red signal, rendering him powerless. The attendants gasped as their crew IDs failed, leaving them locked out of the system they once wielded with arrogance. The passengers erupted, some clapping, some whispering in disbelief. "It is happening right now," a man muttered, holding his phone high to capture every second. The young woman in row 4 nearly shouted, "She did it! They are finished!" The manager looked down at his dead badge, his face pale, his authority shattered. He tried to speak, but no words came. The power he had abused was stripped from him in an instant, not by shouting, not by force, but by quiet, unshakable authority. The woman remained seated, her brown leather bag at her side, her phone resting lightly on the tray table. She did not gloat. She did not raise her voice. Her silence was more powerful than their protests. Justice had been delivered, swift and undeniable, in front of every single witness at 37,000 feet. The cabin was still buzzing when she finally rose from her seat. Not hurried, not triumphant, but steady, like someone who carried the weight of history with every step. The torn boarding pass lay forgotten on the floor, meaningless now. Every eye followed her as she stood tall in the aisle. Her gaze swept the cabin, not just the crew who had tried to erase her, but the passengers who had witnessed it all. Her voice was calm, measured, and unshakable. "You tried to humiliate me because of my skin. You tried to erase me with lies, but I do not need to beg for dignity. I do not need to raise my voice. I am the result of every attempt to silence me." The words landed heavy, filling the air like a verdict. Passengers began to applaud, some standing, some raising their phones higher, capturing not just the downfall of arrogance, but the quiet power of justice. She lifted her brown leather bag, placed her phone back inside, and looked one last time at the trembling faces of the former crew. "Remember this moment. I do not need to film you. I am the ending of your story." With that, she turned back toward her seat. The applause swelled, echoing through the cabin. Justice had not been shouted into existence. It had been carried in silence, revealed with truth, and sealed with power that no one could deny.